welcome to our webinar series, Spotlight on Structured Literacy. My name is Lama Farhan, and I serve on the IDA Georgia Board of Directors, and I'm the chair of the webinar committee. On behalf of the boards of both IDA and the Reading League Georgia, we are pleased to be offering this webinar series for the 5th year. IDA and the Reading League are committed to providing information on evidence-based practices to educators, parents, and advocates. In doing so, we hope all students will have access to structured literacy instruction. In this 5-part series, our speakers draw on the science of reading and the science of the teaching of reading. In tonight's webinar, Nancy Eberhardt will discuss how syntax, which is the term for sentence level language structures, governs how words are arranged to make meaning. Sentences are building blocks for text, so readers must derive meaning from individual sentences in order to attain text level comprehension. The sentence is the linguistic environment that determines the meaning of many words, making the relationship between syntax and vocabulary important to reading comprehension. Nancy will focus on the relationship between the 8 grammatical elements, each with a specific meaning-based function and syntactic structures. The session will also illustrate how instruction can capitalize on and foster these connections through the intentional selection of words, text, and instructional activities. By utilizing effective instructional practices at the sentence level, teachers can facilitate text comprehension based on the text material used in their instructional settings. But before we begin, thank you to those who submitted questions when you registered for this webinar. As a reminder, if you have other questions, please put them in the chat box. The chat will be monitored this evening by Elizabeth Hogan, President of the Reading League Georgia. During the Q&A, our speaker will address as many of your questions as time allows. And now I'll turn it over to Kim to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Lama, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. Nancy Eberhardt is an educational consultant with extensive experience as a resource teacher, special education administrator, and professional development provider. She has co-authored several literacy materials, including Sortagories, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Nancy, with Cheryl Ferlito, and Language, the Comprehensive Literacy Curriculum with Jane Fell Green, and the Literacy How Professional Learning Series with Margie Gillis. She is currently a consultant with the 95% Group and the Reading Universe Taxonomy Project. Nancy serves as co-editor-in-chief for IDA's Perspectives on Language and Literacy and is a strong advocate for preventing reading underachievement by supporting teachers with professional development and evidence-based resources. Please join me in welcoming Nancy Eberhardt.
Thank you, Kim, for that introduction. And for having me as part of this series. It's really an honor to be here. I had an opportunity to sit in on the first session and loved Dr. Elliman's wide-ranging discussion about comprehension, reading comprehension. Tonight, I'm going to dial in on a more narrow topic, as Lama said, syntax and its role in reading comprehension. So with that, let me get started. Whoops. These are the questions I plan to answer tonight, which are partly drawn from questions that you all submitted. So what is syntax? What is a function-based approach? And that will be contrasted with a more conventional terminology approach to syntax. Where is syntax in structured literacy lessons? I think this is an important aspect of tonight, which is to look at the phonics part of structured literacy and be sure that we are adding this language comprehension aspect. And Importantly, I hope on a practical level, what are some of the examples of instruction to link syntax to reading comprehension? So, simply put, syntax is one of the domains of language, and as we see it highlighted here, I think we've, as part of the science of reading, have placed a lot of emphasis on the phonology and perhaps morphology, the word reading part. And my goal tonight is to broaden this and add some attention to syntax. This approach, though, often has us looking at the domains of language sort of separate or siloed. And what I want to do tonight is to show syntax as part of a more integrated system. And this graphic, the word knowledge network, was something that Cheryl Ferlito and I designed as part of our work on sortagories because we wanted to demonstrate and illustrate the iterative and interactive and integrated nature of syntax, actually all of the domains. So we'll come back to this in a minute. Why is this important? This multi-component approach, because in fact, to be a fluent, comprehending reader, all of these components have to become integrated. And so it's important as we think about instruction to become as integrated in that as possible, which means we've got to get to syntax. What is a syntax? I think the simplest way to think about it is to think of it as sentence level language structure. It's where the words, phrases, and clauses come together into meaningful sequences called sentences. And syntactic knowledge, of course, then is important, or actually would be essential to comprehension of text. Why is teaching syntax important? Probably my most favorite recent reason for teaching syntax is conveyed by this quote, which is that sentence level abilities made just as large a contribution to reading as word reading to reading comprehension. And I think this is really important in a time where we devote a lot of time to phonics, that we realize that we also need to be working on sentence level abilities. And one of the most quotable quotes, quoted quotes rather, is this from Cheryl Scott, which is, if we can't understand individual sentences, we're likely not to understand connected text. So where is syntax in the simple view of reading? Well, logically, it's in that language comprehension part. And in the same way that we understand that letter sound associations and morphological markers like the S can help us build words, and by rearranging them, we can get different words. And that is this magnificent system we have for word reading. Well, we have a similar amazing system, actually, perhaps even more amazing, is that we have these parts that we put together to make up thoughts. And so it's who did what, who or what did what, to whom or what. And these are the parts conventionally we call subject, predicate, direct object. But when we look at text, what we're really looking at is this pattern, this predictable pattern repeating itself as reflected by the color coding. So sentence comprehension relies on this predictable word order. Man bites dog is subject, verb, direct object, or in functional terms, who did what to whom. An important comment that there is a huge relationship between syntax and semantics. In fact, if you look at the reading rope, syntax and semantics are on the same strand of the rope. But a sentence can be syntactically correct, like this sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, but be semantically meaningless. So we have to be cautious that just putting words in a who did what to whom order does not necessarily mean it's going to make sense. So this is an important point. Conversely, seeing a word in a context will often help us determine its meaning, and we'll see more of that as we go on. So I mentioned that I'm going to talk about a function-based approach this evening, and that's in contrast to the conventional terminology. I tried to learn about syntax in my schooling, education, using the conventional terminology, and it got me nowhere because I didn't really understand the terminology, and it wasn't helping me either read or write. But then I learned about this function-based approach, which is flipping it around to meaning. So let's see what I mean by this. In these 3 sentences, identify, if you would, please, what information is the part in green that I just highlighted in green answering? What question does it answer? Hopefully, you're thinking it's telling us when. When? Yesterday. When? At dusk. When? As the sunlight faded. If I can identify that function, which is really getting at meaning, it's telling me an answer to a question that's helping me think about the text, then it's an easier step to now go to the conventional terminology, and that single word is an adverb. The phrase is an adverbial phrase, and this clause is an adverbial clause. So when we say function first, we're talking about what question, what information is it conveying, and then I can do the conventional terminology. Just like learning to decode words, we have to get those building blocks. To do syntax, we have to understand the building blocks. Happily, there are only 8 to build all these sentences in our language, and we're going to go through these. And I should say before I go any further that these slides look beautiful because I'm having the thrill of my life to be working on the Reading Universe Taxonomy project as they build out the language comprehension side. So all of these things that you are seeing here that look beautiful are available to you for free on the Reading Universe website, and you'll have that link later on. So let's talk about the blocks. There are 3 of them that talk about the who's or what's of our world. They're the nouns, the words that tell us more about a noun, and then pronouns that replace a noun. We have another pair of building blocks that are our action words, the verbs, and then the words that tell us more about the action. And then we have some really critical components, building blocks, the pronouns and prepositions, not pronouns, the prepositions and conjunctions. And while these are itty-bitty words very often, they are the kind of linguistic glue. They are holding together ideas. They're signaling connections, and we're going to see why that's important a little bit later too. And then there are interjections, which is like the spice of our language. So what I'd like to do very, very quickly, I like to call this a brief but spectacular overview of the building blocks. I want to do this mostly to emphasize what these function-based questions are. And I would invite you to go to the Reading Universe and get to look at yourself in slower motion at another time. But nouns answer who or what. In the sentences, it's the gardener or the cactus. The who is the gardener, the what is the cactus. The verbs tell us did what. So they grew or is what are those linking verbs. And while there aren't many linking verbs, we tend to use them a lot. Adjectives tell us more about the nouns, and they answer only these questions: how many, what kind, and which ones. So in the sample sentence, it's 10 for how many, tall is what kind, and which one, it's the one with the prickly spikes. And then we have words that tell more about the actions. And again, we have a limited number of function-based questions that they answer: where, when, how, and why. And you can see how those are played out in that example. So these are the function-based questions that handled the first four building blocks. Now we move to that next set of building blocks, prepositions. And these are the words that show relationships between words. So if I want to understand the relationship of the cactus to the house, it would be by. I could say next to, I could say in, but in this case, I've used that preposition by. The next function, or excuse me, building block is pronouns, and these replace nouns. Instead of repeating the naming word over and over again, we do use prepositions. In this case, she for gardener and it for cactus. Conjunctions are words that join words, phrases, and clauses. We have other conjunctions. We're not going to get into these this evening that signal other relationships. They also serve as signposts to help us understand the flow of information. And then, last but not least, are those interjections, which are our expression of emotion in words. So, here's a chance for you to try out. Can you identify the blocks and their function? And I'll just give you a few seconds to do that. All right. Hopefully you got that all right. So what I've tried to suggest so far is that the sound letter correspondences are to words, as grammatical building blocks are to sentences, and ultimately sentences are to text. And if we think of this as that kind of cumulative and systematic process, hopefully that will help. But so far, all we've done is talk about the equivalent of the letters to words. Now we need to talk about getting these building blocks into what I love this quote that Nancy Hennessy and Julia Salomon used in their Perspectives article that came from the Motes and Hennessy article, which is that this is a linguistic frame. Sentences are a structure into which we move these blocks. So let's take a look at that. We have a subject and a predicate that they are answering. They have a job to do as well. Who or what did what? And then we have this example. So let's take a look at this in terms of which building blocks we are using. So in the case of the subject, we're going to be using the noun and the verb. And with just those two parts, we can build a bare bones basic sentence. And for those who are saying, so where do I begin to teach syntax? This is where we begin. Once we have the nouns and we have the verbs, we can build a sentence, and that's what we should do. Then we can tell more about the more about the noun using adjectives and those questions that we ran through a minute ago, and adverbs tell us more about the verb. And in the case of the subject, we can also use pronouns. We also have, as another basic simple sentence type, we can add an object, the receiver of the action. And so we have the who did what to whom. And that is what that pattern or that linguistic structure is telling us. So we know the gardener planted what? He planted the cactus. So the first part of our structure is the same. And then we can add the to whom or what. And as you might expect, because it's answering whom or what, it's the same set of building blocks that we repeat. Now that we have reviewed the 8 grammatical building blocks and how they slot into or slide into that linguistic frame we call a sentence, we can turn our attention to how we might teach syntactic knowledge. In this session, I'm going to go through 5 activities that take us from individual words to application to text. So let's get started. Let's begin by going back to the word knowledge network to see the relationship between the phonics lesson, the structured literacy lesson, where we focus on learning to decode words, and then carry that around to some of these language comprehension components. In terms of learning to decode, we analyze the phonemic structure of a word, then we assign the letter or letters that represent each of those sounds, and that's at the core of basic decoding. And we've also kept in this model the syllable unit because that is the next largest building block. But what we want to illustrate is that we don't really know a word until we continue around to the other layers where we talk about, in terms of semantics, what does the word mean? And what we learn very quickly is that most words have more than one meaning. For example, the word lodge, which we're using as an illustration here, can mean to get stuck, but it can also mean a small cabin or a beaver's home. We also can modify this word by adding morphological units such as a prefix dis or a suffix ing. And in doing that, we multiply the meanings and the application of the word. But it isn't until we actually get to the area of syntax and we put the word into a context that we can determine which of these meanings the word that we actually have in mind for that word. Could it be the lodge, which is a namer, a noun, or is it the action to get lodged, which would be obviously an action? So to see how to teach kids how to think about this, we can take the words that they can decode, for example, in a DGE lesson, and we can discuss, is it a namer, a who or what? Is it an action, did what, or perhaps it could be both. And in that conversation, we are really developing vocabulary. So let's just sort these words. Lodge, actually, if we think about it, could be both, as we just saw on the word knowledge network. And each of these words we can continue to sort. This is a wonderful opportunity to work on oral language discussion with your students. So let's see this lesson in action with Carla Stanford from the Reading Universe.
Now, we're going to be word detectives. You already know how to read these words, but now we have to make sure we can think about what they mean and how we use them. I'm going to show you the word. We're going to read it. We're going to talk about, is it a namer or is it an action? Or could it be both? Are y'all ready? What's our word? Everyone read it. Judge. Turn and talk with your seat partners. Talk about the meaning and talk about, is it a namer, an action, or both?
Somebody is like judging someone like off of what they do, I guess.
I'm hearing all these amazing things. I heard some amazing work all around. I'm going to have Amy share her thinking. What do you think about the word judge? Can it be a namer? Can it be an action? Or can it be both? And explain your thinking.
It can be both because it can be like a person that's a judge.
Wait a minute. Wait, do you guys agree? Can it be a person that's a judge? Oh my goodness. Okay. All right, we're all on the same page. Keep going.
Or it could be like someone is judging another person.
Wait, if you're judging someone, is it something you're doing?
Yes.
Do you guys agree it's something you're doing?
Yes.
Say, I am judging the food on how good it is. Say that.
I am judging the food on how good it is.
So if I was like the judge, the person in a cooking contest, then I would actually do the action, right, of judging.
I love that video because of not only the distinction in developing this multiple meaning idea, and that's based on the function of the word, but how much engagement and language and conversation is going on. I think that's a wonderful model. Now, the next activity that we're going to look at is where we can expand on the structured literacy lesson through sentence dictation, where we practice phonics and function at the same time. And as an example, this series of sentences would be perhaps in a unit on the CK spelling for k or the SH spelling for sh. And what we're illustrating through this is, and providing practice in, is not only spelling the words correctly, but also if we look at the first sentence, we are talking about ducks as a who or what, whereas in the second sentence, we have duck as an action. And at the core of this application of phonics to function is the intentional, very deliberate selection of the words and the sentences that we practice in. So we get to see this in action with another video. This is Lisa Glickman, who is in the Burgess Peterson Academy in Atlanta, Georgia, and she is going to illustrate how this works.
Okay, the first thing we're going to do is practice writing the letters that spell the oi sound.
These second graders at Burgess Peterson Academy in Atlanta have been learning about vowel teams OY and OI in their daily phonics lesson.
So we have two ways to spell the oi sound, right?
Now, reading specialist Lisa Glickman will guide them through dictation, starting with writing words.
When we do our word dictation, you're going to have to listen for where in the word that oi comes so that you know which way you're going to spell oi.
And she's going to weave in language instruction. She's going to teach her students how to identify the jobs these words can do in a sentence.
The other thing we're going to think about today is, after we do the words, we're going to think about, is the word a who or a what, right? Is it a noun? Does it tell us who or what? Or is it something that you can do? Is it a did what? Is it a verb, an action? Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
The word is hoist. What's the word?
Hoist.
Hoist. I hear oi, st. Everybody write the word hoist. Hoist. Nice job. Everybody say, to hoist is to lift. To hoist is to lift. So if I was saying I need to lift this heavy box, I could also say I need to hoist this heavy box. Hoist is to lift.
By pairing a simple motion with the definition of hoist, Ms. Glickman gives students a physical connection that reinforces its meaning.
So, is that a who or a what? Or is hoist something that you could do, a did what? What do you think?
What?
It's a did what. Good job. Are you ready? Next word. Look at me. The word is point. What's the word?
Point.
Point. Can we tap that together? Make sure we get all those sounds. Oi. Point.
Ms. Glickman carefully chose each of the words in this lesson. The word point provides an opportunity to explore multiple meanings.
Make sure you have it like I have it. Okay, now I want everybody to think for a minute. Guess what? You can't answer until I go like this. You ready? Point. Is point a who or a what or a did what? Everybody think. What do you think?
Did what?
Okay, can I point at something? Is that something I can do?
Yes.
It is a did what, but guess what? May I borrow this? What is this?
A point.
It's a point of a pencil. So guess what? The word point can be a what, and it can be a did what. You're right.
So she continues on and applies this to sentence dictation. So let's watch that.
The last step in this lesson is sentence dictation.
What we're going to do now is I'm going to say a sentence to you. We're going to repeat it, and you're going to write it, okay? The sentence is, the box was hoisted into the van. Say it.
The box was hoisted into the van.
Good job. Write it. The box was hoisted into the van. The box was hoisted into the van. Okay, let's read this whole thing together. Are you ready? Go.
The box was hoisted into the van.
Okay, now we have to be detectives. All right, park your pencils. Everybody think in your head, what is the who or the what of this sentence? Everybody think for a minute. What is the who or the what in this sentence? Everybody?
The box.
The box.
In the van.
The box is the who or a what that it's about. Yes, a van is also a what. That is so smart. Okay, the box is the who or the what that the sentence is talking about. Did what? What did we do with the box, everybody?
Hoisted.
We hoisted. Everybody show me hoisted with your hands. Hoisted. Everybody say hoisted means lift.
Hoisted means
Yes, so hoist means to lift. The box was hoisted. Oh my gosh, we still had one more question. Where? Where was the box hoisted, everybody?
into the van.
Into the van is what answers the where question. So in this sentence, we expanded it. We have a what was the box. We have a did what, it was hoisted. And where? Into the van. So when you are reading and you are reading sentences and you think about the who or the what, did what, where, it helps you to understand what's happening in the story. And when you're writing, when you become writers and you're writing your stories, you want to think about putting all these things into your sentences so that it paints a really interesting picture for your readers.
So one of the things I want to comment on about the last part of that lesson is to notice or to recall how when they were reading that sentence and discussing the sentence, they were beginning to group words together into phrases, and that's going to be relevant when we move on in a minute to another activity. But before we do that, let's talk about sentence scramble, which is a wonderful activity that allows us to practice and apply the grammatical building block questions. So we can take a sentence from a decodable text. We can write a sentence that allows us to practice some of the decoding that we've worked on. The sentences are really of your choosing, but the purpose of this is to process how to put the sentence into the right meaningful order. So we can do that by asking a series of questions. The first question we would ask is, what is the action? And we do start with the action instead of the who or what, because usually there's only one action, or at least in this sentence there is. So we can zero in on that. There might be more than one who or what, and that can make it challenging to get the right one to build the sentence. So we would choose the action, and in this case it's plants. And you might be thinking plants could be a who or what, but in this case it is the action. Then we do look for the who or what would do that action, and then we would have gardener, and then we would add to whom or what, and then we have a few more words left over, those determiners, the, and we would put those in place and then put the sentence together. And in this process, we are practicing this understanding of the questions that these words are answering. Let's try another one. What's the action? You might have a couple possible answers there. We're using lodged. Now we ask who or what lodged. It would be the barge. And then where? And it would be under the low bridge. And then we always want to end by having the sentence with the correct punctuation and capitalization. This activity can be done as a warm-up. It's a way to review whatever the building blocks that you have worked on. And once students have begun to look at and begin to recognize, as they did in Lisa Glickman's lesson, a phrase that's answering where, we are helping students develop an important aspect of reading, which is to read with prosody, because prosody, which suggests that we're understanding the text, helps with our comprehension. And we can help, as we just saw in the video, that we can point out aspects of the sentence that are helping us to group those words and to create the phrasing, or what we like to call syntactic parsing. So we can point out the subject, or we can point out the predicate, or as we saw, a prepositional phrase, into the van. And in the case of some longer sentences, we can do that phrasing at a dependent or independent clause level. So let's practice this or try this. Let's read until we answer what. And you're going to be scooping or thinking of the tall saguaro cactus. So then we want to know, and we're kind of primed to ask, did what? What did the cactus do? Well, it grew and grew. And then we're probably curious to add a little more information about that grew and grew, and we would ask where under the Palo Verde tree. In this process, what we're doing is engaging our thinking while we're reading to get to those meaningful chunks, those meaningful units. And we know that this contributes to more fluent reading. Now, the next and final activity we're going to talk about relates to the topic of cohesion, or the aspect of cohesion in text. I want to just spend a minute talking about this because it's a term you probably know what cohesion is, but maybe didn't know the name for it. But this is where the aspect of or the way that we organize our language to make connections from sentence to sentence. And so there are several things that we can do to help students understand those connections. And I like to say that cohesion is where grammar and comprehension come together. Kane and Nash also suggest how important this ability to detect the integration of meaning across sentences is to our understanding. And the way that we do that is by recognizing some of these devices that we use to make those connections. So Nancy Hennessy and Julia Salomon have a really helpful graphic or structure here to sort out these cohesive devices that we use in our language. They've organized them into those that they called cohesive ties, which include pronouns, repetition of words, pronouns, and synonyms. And then the others are connectives, which are the conjunctions, prepositions, and adverbs. For today, in our limited time, we're going to focus on the cohesive ties and take a closer look at that. So, what do we mean by repetition? Just what it sounds like, that we're going to use the same word again, plants and plants. But we know that we don't talk that way. We don't see that in writing very often, that we come up with other ways to refer to whatever the who or what we're talking about happens to be. And one of the ways that we do that is with pronouns. And so pronouns replace, as we talked about earlier, that their job, their function is to replace the noun. So in this case, plants is replaced by the word they. The last way that we create cohesion is through these cohesive ties, is through synonyms. That is, to reword whatever our original word that named a person or thing, place or thing. So in this case, we could reword plants with cactus, pine, and grass. And in doing that, those three words mean the same thing, not exactly the same, but they are substituting for the original word plants. This was, in fact, an activity that Cheryl Ferlito and I included in Sortagories going back to the Word Knowledge Network, because we wanted to give a lot of practice in this very skill of determining the difference between repeat, reword, and replace. So someone who did a really lovely job of converting this idea into a mnemonic were Charlie Haynes and Jennings, where they actually created this graphic to help students in their writing, which is they would write their original noun, they would generate a list of synonyms, and then they would have the pronouns that would work to replace whatever the original noun is. And they did this for writing purposes, so students would have something to refer to. But we think it is as applicable for determining and tracing the connections within text as well as a reader. So to do this, however, we need to take time to explicitly teach what do we mean by synonyms. And so if we have the word woodpecker, we might generate some synonyms like feathered driller or hole drilling birds. And then we can show students that we could say the same sentence using any of those, and the sentence would mean the same thing. So we're illustrating in a very explicit way that we can reword. And then we need to do the same thing, not on the same day necessarily, but the same thing in teaching the relevant pronouns. And today we're only looking at the pronouns that become subject in sentences. We would also have to do the same thing with objective form of the pronouns. But in this case, we would take a sentence. We have our woodpecker back again. We would say, okay, which of those pronouns can take the place or replace the name or woodpecker, and we would show them that it would be the word it. And doing this in a very concrete way by actually marking it out and showing that word, just replacing it within the sentence, is a very explicit form of instruction that we can apply. So by doing that, we can see how we can trace through this use of this mnemonic circle how this cohesion circle mnemonic, we can show the relationship that is actually existing within this little paragraph. And so to see this all come together, this lesson, the students in this video have already talked about what pronouns are that they replace. They've already learned about synonyms that they reword, and now they're going to actually trace what we call the referential chain, that is the connections across the text, to determine what the text is about. So here we go.
And then what other ways did this author represent the who or what?
The blooms.
Do you guys agree? Yeah. The blooms. Another way that the who or what is represented.
Flowering.
Flowering. I think there's one more part. Can you start the sentence right here?
The flowering part dries up after a month.
Okay, what is the who or what in the sentence? The flowering part dries up after a month. Who or what is this sentence about?
The flowering.
The flowering
part.
The flowering part. The flowering part is a synonym or another way to say
white and yellow flowers.
White and yellow flowers.
Just like
or the blooms. I think you're getting it. I love that you know. Look right here. We have white and yellow flowers. Oh, and bloom is our did what? It's our action. We have the blooms, which is the who or what, which is the subject. Again, so we have it here. We have it here. Huh. Everyone read this word?
They.
What is they referring back to?
The white and yellow flowers.
Yes, the blooms. So they is the pronoun. Pronouns refer back. The way it works is they is going to refer back to the last who or what. So they refers back to the last who or what, which is the blooms. So they refers back to the blooms, and the blooms,
refers back to white and yellow flowers.
And they're all ways to represent the same thing.
Now that students have practiced how to identify the who or what and the pronouns and synonyms that support it, the next step in their lesson will be to remove some of the guardrails and shift towards tracing the subject on their own.
in that video, I think we can see how much thinking, how much language processing actually has to go on to comprehend. And I think one of the things that we can help train students to do is to do the work of thinking through those connections. And when they get to the end of a paragraph, to be able to answer who or what that paragraph is about and to understand why they know that. So to wrap up, who did what to whom matters. I hope I've illustrated that today in a number of different ways. And whether we're talking about a very simple sentence like Steven Pinker's dog bites man, or we apply this to some content area, photosynthesis converts sunlight and water, or we go to a real abstraction, love conquers all. This same structure, this same pattern exists in all of our language, and it's a pretty powerful tool to understanding in reading comprehension by understanding the structure of sentences. So with that, I'd like to share the resources. This QR code will take you to the Reading Universe website, and you can look for the videos there. And additional resources that I'd like to mention, there is another free resource, and I'm trying to emphasize mostly things that are free to you to expand your knowledge. But one of them is Cascade Reading, where you can drop in text into their reader, and it cascades the text according to what I was showing you as phrasal or syntactic boundaries. So that's a real big help if you're having trouble as a teacher detecting those. It's also something you can use with your students, and there are suggestions on the website how to do that. There are some courses, some through CORE, some through Literacy How, that will walk you through and expand on some of the points I've been talking about this evening. I mentioned the Kate Kane's reference to the cohesive signals or cohesive ties as signposts within the text, and she does a really wonderful job in the podcast highlighted in blue here with explaining how these words that are often these pronouns and prepositions are signaling the connection between words and then, of course, from sentence to sentence. And a few more references, and you will be receiving this list and the slides as part of the follow-up from the webinar. As Kim said, I have the privilege of being on the editorial board for Perspectives, and we did a back-to-back series or issues on syntax in winter and spring of 2025. If you want to know more about syntax, I also would point out there are 2 articles, one in each edition, on assessment. I know that's an area that people like to know more about. It's not as tidy to assess syntax as letter sound associations, but there are things that we can do to determine how students are doing with that. But what I would like to ask as we wrap up, and then maybe I can take time, given how things have gone with the speed of getting through this, to answer some questions. But I would love for you to let us know what you might try.
Yeah, Nancy. So everyone who registered is going to, whether they were on live or weren't able to make it, they're going to get a copy of this video. and they're going to get the slides. And so the links will be there on your PowerPoint slides that they get. And also it's very easy to get to Reading Universe and type in on their search finder for the syntax videos. So I know that you guys are going to go watch those videos. I've had the privilege of seeing them, and they're really amazing. So I'm sorry on behalf of IDA Georgia and TRL Georgia that our tech issues cut that short, Nancy.
Well, yes, I am too. And anyway, but they are part of the grammar skill explainer, if you want to be a little bit more specific when you go to the Reading Universe. And literally content is being added, if not daily, weekly, to that skill explainer, which is very exciting. So for those who are interested in learning more and actually seeing these videos, please do go there. One other free resource that I didn't mention, but I will mention, and I send it so that Elizabeth and others can send this to you, is there's a project that has been in the works between ReadWorks and Whole Phonics. And through the generosity of Whole Phonics giving some free decodables to the ReadWorks website, they have done a whole unit for the level 2 of Whole Phonics on taking a kernel sentence by using words from the decodables and from some articles that have been written to go with this. And all of that will be free to you. So I think it's exciting that we're seeing more and more materials emerging. And it's always fun to have some free ones. So
yeah, and actually, Nancy, I just sent that link to the Whole Phonics work, and I know more is coming, and that Jill is working on that daily at Whole Phonics. She's so generous as well. So I know that that's coming, and I did put that link in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
So hopefully everyone can visit that link and see what they're building over at Whole Phonics that holds hands with this. I do feel slightly happy and a little selfish because we get a little more Q&A time with you, Nancy. So I am bummed we didn't see the videos, but I'm excited because we did have so many really insightful questions, and you already covered many of them. But I did because I feel like we've talked about this before. And I just kind of want everyone to hear this coming from a teacher who has worked really hard on getting structured literacy and phonics instruction into my classroom. This sometimes is scary for teachers that think this is one more thing. And so many people said, where's the scope and sequence for syntax? And what do we go to for tier 1 syntax, instruction? And so I love when you say, honestly, the phonics is going to guide you in that. Like that's your scope and sequence, and then you're just weaving this through. And so I would love for you to kind of expound on that point for us teachers in the in the room tonight that are thinking, how do we go back and incorporate this tomorrow?
Well, I think it's looking at the words that you're working on in part, and anything I'm saying is only in part, but looking at what you're doing in phonics with an eye to which of these words answer who or what, which of these words that we're already working on answer did what. And from that, show the students that they can build a little sentence right there. They have the who and the did what. And that's really what the Whole Phonics and ReadWorks project is going to give you some ammunition to do. And those words can be done using decodable text. And one of the things I thought you were going to say here is, and then what happens as kids get older? What do we do? Well, honestly,
that was coming, Nancy. That was coming.
Well, but I'm gonna sort of weave in an answer to this a little bit, in that when we're dealing with older students who need to work on learning syntax, it's the same thing. We're going to build a base sentence. Then once we have that kernel base sentence, whatever your bare bone sentence is, there are lots of ways to talk about. We have the 2 main parts. Then what we do is systematically expand the sentences. And generally, we see expanding the action first by answering where, when, how, and why, mostly where, when, and how, saving why for a little bit later because it gets more complicated. But very quickly, we will see students be able to bring in information that paints a bit more of a picture of that in that sentence. And that's one of the things I really want to encourage you to look for as you look at the video that is on the Reading Universe website, because Lisa Glickman did a beautiful job showing how we could take a little sentence and start adding where, and how each student's where made a really different sentence and different meaning. So the scope and sequence starts with the kernel sentence, expanding the where, not the where, the adverbial information, and then we expand with the adjectives. And that's our simple sentence. Then what we can begin to do is teach conjunctions. And with conjunctions like and, the fanboys, and, or, but, and the rest of those, that little group, we can say, well, if I have the dog sat, I have the cat sat, is there a way that I could combine the two subjects or the two whats together? So I could say the dog and cat sat. So what ends up happening is it's a gradual introduction of a new building block, and then we can do more with our sentence, our simple sentences. You can do this, as I suggested, with either information, words coming from decodable text. But what syntax really allows us to do, and it's really a wonderful thing, is we can do a lot of this work orally by using, as part of read alouds, we can select words from the text that we're reading to the students. In a science course, we could, a class, if we have a science project we're working on, we can do the same kind of who did what or what did what in pretty much any part of the day. Now, is that a lot of work? Perhaps, but I have a feeling, and I know from experience, that when you're thinking this way, you start to see who's and what's everywhere and did what's everywhere. So we go from simple sentence to compounding, and then eventually we get into complex sentences when we've introduced the idea or the concept of a dependent clause, which I didn't attempt to get into this evening. But the scope and sequence are many fewer pieces. I think what is important is to keep applying it using the content, the words, the vocabulary coming from whatever it is you're teaching. And I think one of the big takeaways is it isn't just for English language arts block anymore. And it shouldn't be, because language is in every subject.
Right.
So does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I love that answer. And I feel like I just love the term, just the function-based approach helps me realize, okay, if I'm working on this skill or I'm doing this in this subject area, I'm going to kind of treat everything I'm talking about with my kids or the words that I'm going to dictate as functions. And I know that's what those videos are going to show. Us as well, but it's easy to kind of see it that way and hear you explain it that way, because it's not a separate thing once we get used to it, though. But it is starting that process, and just getting used to kind of thinking about everything and the words we're choosing intentionally for the function-based approach.
Right. Well, in both of the videos, the one that Carla did with the word lodge, and the one that Lisa did with the OI vocabulary.
Right.
I think seeing how they do this and replicating that, I think will get people started with very few problems.
Agree. And I think I know what you're going to say with this because you hinted at it, but a question we always get, Nancy, a ton, everyone's like, okay, well, how early can I start? And then what am I doing with my high schoolers? And I feel like you kind of addressed that. Like, we're starting with the basics, right? And then just building.
Right. Yes. And I think if you had the opportunity to hear Charles Hume talk at IDA or at Big Sky, or if you've ever read any of his material, he's really equating reading with language. Language is reading, reading is language. And to that end, he's also talking about the early preschool readers and building the language, because why not? This is where we can begin. And you don't have to be reading to be understanding these concepts. So you can start, I'd advocate, you should start early on. Now, I do want to make an interesting point, or an important point. Maybe it isn't interesting, but I think it's important. And that is that there is a difference, and this is maybe what people are thinking, especially with the early readers, is there's a big difference between spoken language, oral language, and book language. And where we get into a funny little bump in the road is decodable text isn't really like either one. Decodable text has such a unique purpose, which I would say I love decodable text. Some of my best friends have written decodable text. But if we don't deal with other kinds of text, we are limiting the language development and exposure. But where am I going with the book language and oral language? It's important to keep in mind that that reading is not just our spoken language written down. That when we write, we are doing something very different. And why is that? Well, when we're talking to each other or in a classroom, we have in common the thing we're looking at, the person we're talking to, so we can talk much more simply. When we go to write things, we start adding descriptors. We add a clause, we add a positive, we keep expanding in print. And in doing that, by adding all of these added clauses and phrases and so on, the text becomes much more complex. So I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is I don't like starting to talk about syntax as it relates to complex text. But eventually we want to get to complex text. But I think until you understand how words work together to convey meaning, we don't have a common language about how to talk about this with children. So, I mean, even an activity like sentence combining, if we say, let's combine these, how do we tell the kids what are they combining if we're talking about the subject or the predicate, the action or the noun? So I think we have to understand the prerequisite for doing an activity like sentence combining. Now let's go to the older kids. I had, as Kim said, the privilege to work on language exclamation, the comprehensive literacy curriculum, which was an intervention curriculum for older students. Translation, these are the kids that didn't learn to read in the primary grades or in the elementary grades. They didn't know anything about syntax either. And we had to go back to the basics and say who did what to whom. And it was identical. The only thing that changed, and not even all of the time, were the words or the topics we were doing this with. So our language isn't different because of our age. Our language is our language. And wherever we enter in with that knowledge, that's where we have to teach our kids. And what I talked about tonight can be done with older kids, and done with the right dignity and respect for their age, but they still need to be learning it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I just appreciate you kind of expounding on that, because we always get the age thing, but it makes sense that kind of even with phonics and reading, we have to start with the basics and the foundation and build from there. meet our kids where they are. Lastly, just as a funny quick thing before we wrap up, there was definitely someone in the chat who must have been a tortured Catholic schoolgirl like me and said, is there still room for sentence diagramming?
Oh,
Honestly, I want to say my opinion. No, I would have much rather gone by the functions and talked about who and or what did what instead of having to draw all that stuff. But I'll let the expert answer.
well, I'm not sure I'm the expert, but here's what I will offer, a couple of comments on this. And it's funny that you say that because this came up in another recent session that I did. Like, so where's the sentence diagramming? Okay. When we talk about a linguistic frame, what could be more of a linguistic frame than a diagram? Okay, that's really what it is. And if you took that diagram, that line with the vertical, and you put who did what, you're doing the very same thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, one of the most appreciated activities by kids in the language curriculum, because we did do diagramming in every unit, sentence diagramming. The multi-language learners loved it because it was a concrete way for them to see the organization of English, and it allowed, where possible, teachers to say, here's what it's like in your language, perhaps Spanish. It's just different, not wrong. And we need to have you understand that this is the way it works in English. And I think there's a lot of help in understanding that, a lot of support when we can actually create something visual. So I think that sentence diagramming can still be helpful. I think sadly it isn't taught much anymore. It for reasons that I'm sure just died with many of the things that we aren't teaching as explicitly in terms of grammar and syntax. But I would not dissuade you at all from using sentence diagramming. And if you think about the images I was showing with the frames, just imagine that being your diagram, and that's the same thing.
Yeah, I kind of like the wording better of who or what did what, but I
For sure.
agree, it's the exact same thing. We're laying out, the parts. So
Right. And then underneath the who or what, you could,
right.
You could have where, when, not where, when, how. You could have um, how many, which one, what kind, that underneath the noun, and then you could have where, when, how underneath the predicate. I mean, what we're really showing in a function-based approach, one of the things we're showing is the relationship of the words and their functions. Like, what is it that these words are telling us, and having us focus in on that meaning. One of the other things that I would just say is, why does function-based, I think, work and help is, if we think about what keeps us engaged and thinking about what we're doing, is if we're asking questions. There's a kind of an engagement factor that asking these questions impacts or has the influences. And so I think part of why saying who or what versus what's the subject, it's a whole different thing going on in your head. And that what's going on in your head is much more interactive.
Right.
So
Awesome. Well, we have gone over a little bit. I can't believe it. I'm still bummed about the videos, Nancy.
oh my gosh, I can't even
apologize. No, it's on us. Yours were working great. So that's a tech issue with either Zoom. Hey, we'll just blame Zoom.
Let's blame Zoom. Okay, I'll go with that.
But we so appreciate you doing this webinar for us tonight. And I feel like people are walking away for sure. And especially after they see those amazing videos on Reading Universe, they are walking away with something to do tomorrow with their students. And that's so important. And that's exactly why, we do these webinars and what we want to provide. So thank you so much. We loved having you.
Well, and I just want to say, I loved following Dr. Elliman. And
Yes.
I think it's fabulous that you're going to have Dr. Haynes next, because he can expand on what I told you about the cohesive circle.
Right. You're stealing my thunder, Nancy. Yes.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
I'm kidding. But you're so right. I was so excited. And so we do want to plug our next webinar is March 11th with Charles Haynes. And we're so excited because he is going to dip right into that writing and strategies to support writing and how that then is going to aid in comprehension. So we've done a really good job of, putting this in this way, in this order. And that's going to hold hands with exactly what you started with us with that sentence writing and, speaking it first and then being able to then write it. It's going to work great. So please join us for our next webinar on March 11th. And the TRL Georgia social media will start and website will start having that registration link go out probably as soon as tomorrow or later this week. And I know IDA Georgia will also be promoting it on social media. And so look for the registration for the March 11th webinar. That is our next one in our series. And remember that if you have colleagues that missed tonight's webinar, all registrants will receive a video of the webinar tonight and the copy of the slides. So thank you so much again, Nancy, for the copy of the slides. And that'll be awesome because everyone will be able to watch the videos from that. All registrants will also have the opportunity to fill out a knowledge check or a request for a certificate of attendance. So after you viewed the webinar live or recorded, the form will be sent out early next week, and you'll have approximately 1 week to submit the form. So those who fill the form out will receive the certificate of attendance the day after the deadline for submission. On behalf of the IDA Georgia Board and TRL Georgia Board, we appreciate you attending tonight. We so appreciate you, Nancy. We hope you'll register for the March 11th webinar with Charles Haynes. We can't wait to see you then. Thanks for being here, and we hope you have a great rest of your night.